On this episode of The Digital Keep, we're going to talk about the spark of innovation, how it leads to engineering and innovation. We'll talk about my grandfather's relationship to the Apollo 13 lunar entry module simulators, me fixing a boombox as a preteen on my childhood floor, and how that all leads to giving people space to innovate. This is The Digital Keep. Welcome to The Digital Keep. I'm Guy Tietz. This is a show about people, cybersecurity, and networks. A show for people trying to build legacy. Today kicks off something special, a 3-part series I'm calling The Backbone of Innovation. Now, this series isn't about patents or engineers, although patents and engineers may be the result, but that's not the focus. The focus is real people, technicians, tinkerers, mentors, and mentees. The people and the mindset to build the future with calloused hands, curious minds, and yes, a sense of responsibility that echoes through generations. These are stories from my own life, from my family, from my work. And since the current audience is mostly family, friends, and colleagues, maybe some of these are from your story too. Our shared story that means so much to me. Today's episode is about sparks, the sparks of innovation. Or, if you're a Disney fan, one little spark. Not the dramatic kind that you see at the end of the day at theme parks or on Independence Day, but the quiet, lasting sparks. The ones that start in a control room or a preteen's bedroom floor, yet light the way for everything that follows. That's exactly where I want to begin, with one of the stories that made me realize how innovation is legacy. I want to tell you about my grandfather and a moment in history where what he knew and his teammates, electronics technicians, electricians, and mechanics, helped keep people alive a million miles away. My grandfather worked at the Kennedy Space Center during the Apollo program. He and his team maintained the Lunar Entry Module, or LEM, simulator, or at least one of them. Well, if you've seen the movie Apollo 13, there's a scene in there that my grandfather was pretty excited about. So we had rented the movie, went to Blockbuster, rented the VHS tape, put it in the VCR, started playing it because, these are older stories from a time long past. Well, while we're watching that movie, my grandfather starts to get a little bit excited, and he was a really mellow World War II Army vet that didn't get excited about a lot, but he started to get a little excited, and he was like, oh, get ready. This part is going to be great. He knew exactly what was coming. So let me set the scene really quick. In the movie, the astronauts are stuck, and they're going to be stranded in space and run out of air and run out of power if they don't figure something out. And all they have is what's in that lunar entry module, the real one. Well, how do we figure this out? Well, in the movie, there's a little bit of a different scenario. So as we get to this scene where we start figuring things out, my grandfather gets a little excited, and then when he sees an astronaut climb in and start pulling things apart and trying and testing things, he got up. He ejected the tape, and he walked out of the room. Later, I asked what happened. I knew better than to ask him right then. I had to wait for him to calm down a little bit because didn't want to deal with angry grandpa, because angry grandpa may say things he doesn't mean. So I waited for him to calm down and went and talked to him. He told me what really happened. See, him and 4 or 6 other technicians who maintained the LEM simulator climbed inside. I think it was only 4 of them because it was a really small space, but about 4 or 5 guys climbed inside the lunar entry module, and there was a few engineers that had designed it that were standing outside, and a few engineers who had designed other parts of the rocket that were standing outside. And everybody was crowded in this room. And those few technicians, because they were the ones who worked on it every day, they knew every system inside and out physically. They hadn't just designed it, they built it and maintained it. And when you build and maintain something, the blueprints kind of get a little different. So the blueprint says one thing, but then when you get into reality, something's different. Something's off by a millimeter, and you have to move something or you have to machine a specific screw. And whatever they did in the lunar entry module itself, they had to repeat in the simulators. So it didn't necessarily match all the drawings, but all the simulators did match each other and match the lunar entry module. So these technicians were in there and they were pulling things apart and they were figuring out what could work where. And the engineers were giving their feedback. And there was that astronaut that we see in the movie. He was also giving his feedback and listening to what everybody was talking about and how everything would go together, so that he could then translate it into astronaut speak to the other astronauts. Why was this the case? Well, today, our astronauts are PhD astrophysicists and scientists and engineers, and a few of them are extremely talented pilots, as well as scientists and engineers. Well, back then, most of those astronauts, those first astronauts, had been test pilots. They tested new technologies. They knew how to push boundaries. They knew how to make snap decisions. But they weren't technically savvy as far as the engineering was concerned. So this test pilot had to relay to his other buddies who were test pilots, turned astronauts, how to put it all together. In order to do that, he had to listen to the technicians and the engineers who had worked together to plan to figure out how to get the Apollo astronauts back, the Apollo 13 astronauts. They made it back. They were safe and sound. My grandfather was upset because the emphasis was on the astronaut and how brilliant he was. But in reality, that's not his experience, or at least not his memory. They took the emphasis off of the technicians. He didn't expect to see his name or hear his name or the other technicians' names. But what he expected was that maybe they would have portrayed 1 or 2 technicians and 1 or 2 engineers climbing in there to figure it out and then explaining it all to the astronaut. Well, that's not what ended up happening. They showed in the movie that it was an astronaut. So my grandfather got a little upset by that. We didn't bring this subject up anymore, but now I understood a little bit more, and I learned this when I was a teenager. So that kind of set me up for the understanding of how technicians and engineers think and work through problems, and how non-technical people can learn from their experience and come together as a group to tie it all together and save lives. Now, this all happened during a great era of American innovation called the space race. The Apollo program and the rest of the space race was a high point in American innovation, but it didn't all happen in a vacuum. It happened in an era where a whole country seemed wired for discovery. Early computers were evolving from punch cards to compilers. Networks were beginning to whisper across ARPANET. The groundwork for almost everything we take for granted today was being laid. by people who knew they were building something bigger than themselves. And I think that's the key. They knew they were building something. They knew they were designing something, but at the time they knew they were building something bigger than themselves. They knew they were building legacy. And that's important to keep in mind, that when you're building these new technologies and innovating, you really are building a legacy. One of these people, and one of the most influential, was a woman named Grace Hopper. Rear Admiral Grace Hopper. If you know who she is, then you may be thinking, she didn't build rockets? And you'd be right. All she did was teach computers to speak. Admiral Hopper developed the first compiler, a program that translates code written in a high-level language into machine-readable instructions. What does that technical phrase even mean? It means she figured out how to make computers understand humans, or maybe humans to understand computers. I'm not sure who learned how to speak what, but she did, and that's what matters. She helped create COBOL, a common business-oriented language for computers, which many financial systems still use, but few, if any, software engineers or computer scientists remember or understand. So it stays locked deep in the deepest digital keep. That and more are her technical achievements. But more than that, she changed the way we think about progress. She used to carry a piece of wire just under 12 inches long. That, she said, was a nanosecond, the distance electricity could travel in a billionth of a second. That was her gift, making the abstract real, making things that you couldn't see visible, making the future reachable. And she left us with a warning, a mantra for innovators everywhere. The most dangerous phrase in the language is, "We've always done it this way." Now, I don't know if it is the most dangerous from a safety perspective, but it is the most limiting from an innovation and creativity perspective, and that is dangerous for our future. In an era of moonshots and microchips, Grace Hopper stood as a bridge between logic and leadership. She's part of this story because she helped build the world the rest of us have inherited. That is innovation by one person who had global impact, and her legacy will live as long as computing is happening. Yep, she's the mother of modern computing, which means her legacy includes AI. So that leaves me with this question. Where does the innovation, imagination, and engineering mindset begin? Where those three things come together, where does that start? Although I'm not an engineer by the rigid standards of academia or many traditional engineering fields, I have been told I have an engineering mindset. So, to explore that, I want to take a step back from the global to the personal, from NASA and the space race and the dawn of the computer age to my childhood bedroom, when I was maybe 10 or 12 years old, because sometimes the most important spark isn't lit in a lab or a simulator. It's lit when someone gives you the freedom to figure out things on your own, even if you didn't know that they had done so. When I was a kid, I had a boombox because, it was the 80s. This boombox had a cassette player with a very cool feature. You didn't have to flip the tape over. Now, if you're listening and you didn't experience this, back in the late 1900s, yeah, I said it. In that window after vinyl albums and 8-track tapes, but before CDs, we had cassette tapes. A cassette was basically a tiny reel-to-reel setup. Inside, a little plastic shell about 3.5 inches wide and 2.5 inches tall. It was a strip of magnetic tape wound between two spools. You'd play side A, press stop, eject the tape, flip it over, stick it back in, and press play again to hear side B. But this boombox had a really cool feature called auto reverse. That meant you didn't have to do any of that. The player would drop the playhead, change which gear system was engaged, and push the head back up to play the tape in reverse, playing from the opposite reel without flipping the tape at all. You just waited about 30 seconds or so, and like magic, side B would start playing. Now, I know 30 seconds is an eternity in 2025, but in the late 80s, you just waited. That's how it worked. You could hear the machine doing its thing. The little static pop, the mechanical shuffle, the click of the head shifting, and then it started playing. So I'm sitting there probably listening to Bon Jovi or Poison, or maybe I had an appetite for destruction that day. Yeah, I listened to hair bands. And no, you don't get to judge me for that. Not unless you lived through it. If you did, judge away. Anyway, side A finishes, and I'm waiting for side B to kick in. I hear the click, I hear the motor shift, and nothing. 30 seconds, 45 seconds, then a full minute. Still no music. So I got up and walked over to the boombox. I leaned in, and sure enough, the take-up reel isn't spinning. That's the part that's supposed to pull the tape forward. The capstan may still be turning or not, I don't know. The pinch roller may be pressing, I don't know. Without that take-up reel engaged, the tape just doesn't move. But I don't know any of that. I don't know how any of that stuff works. I just knew that it used to play and now it didn't. And now I wanted to know why. I wanted to know how to make it work again. Part of me was scared I'd get yelled at for breaking it, even though I hadn't done anything but push play. But mostly I was curious. I hadn't really thought much about how it all worked. But now I wanted to know. So I was thinking about it because I needed my bedroom to rock again. So I decided I was going to fix it. But I had a problem. I wasn't supposed to touch my dad's tools without permission. And I definitely wasn't going to ask. Again, I was scared I might get in trouble for breaking something all I had done was push play on. So I made sure to walk quietly, snuck into the garage, listened for footsteps, made sure nobody was coming, opened up my dad's toolbox as if I was defusing a bomb, slow, careful, still listening. Grabbed a Phillips head and a flathead. I didn't even know what kind of screwdriver I needed. I just knew that these were the ones that I had handed Dad a couple times when we were working on other stuff. So I grabbed them. I went back to my room, sat on the floor with the boombox in front of me. I started taking out screws. 6 around the edge, I think. But the back still wouldn't come off. So I lifted up one side and lifted up the other. Felt where it was kind of stuck towards the middle, looked down, found 2 more screws near the middle. I took those screws out. Mostly lifted up, but it was still stuck. So I opened up the battery compartment, pulled out all the D-cell batteries, and there it was, one last screw hidden inside the battery compartment. So I took that one out, and it came off. But it wasn't fully disconnected. There were these 2 red and black wires that were still running from where the battery box connected into the main part of the boombox. So I kind of laid it on the side and looked down, and it was beautiful and terrifying, and I had no idea what I was looking at. It was a green circuit board with copper traces everywhere and tiny little components, and I was a little bit over my head, but I decided to keep going. I removed the screws that held the green board to the plastic front part of the boombox. 4, maybe 6, I don't know. I gently lifted the circuit board just enough to see underneath of it. lifted up the bottom and pushed play. The tape had been pulled out, so I just kind of pushed play to see what was happening. So I pushed play and I saw the gears spin and I saw everything working right on the forward side. And I saw this little rubber band that connected some gears to what I learned later would be called the take-up reel. Then I hit reverse and I saw the problem. Some gears turned, some didn't. And there was no rubber band. The little pulley, the one that should have connected the reverse drive gear to the take-up reel, was just sitting there, empty. So I thought, all right, I need a rubber band. I kind of eyeballed the distance, used my finger to kind of measure what it was going to be like. I looked over at the other side and plucked that one to figure out exactly how much tension I thought I should have. And, well, then went back on a mission. I snuck around the house, out into the hallway, trying not to get caught. Started tearing through every junk drawer and desk in the house looking for rubber bands. I must have looked completely ridiculous. My parents saw me running from room to room and somehow didn't stop me. Or at least they didn't say anything, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Eventually, I found a little bag of rubber bands in my dad's office. Picked a few that seemed about the right size, grabbed a pair of tweezers and needle nose pliers from the toolbox, figured I'd need them to get the rubber band in place, and went back to my room. I got one end wrapped around the pulley, lined up the drive gear, very carefully stretched a rubber band across to the take-up reel, and it worked. I pushed play on the forward side, everything was working. Push play on the reverse side, everything was working. Everything sounded right. Nothing sounded off. So I put the board back in place, put in a couple of screws, just enough to hold it in place, flipped the thing over, and put my tape in. Side A played. I hit reverse. Side B played, and it sounded great. Not crackling, not distorted, just right. I felt like I had just invented electricity. That spark had just been lit. I reassembled the whole thing, put in all the screws, or at least I thought I did. Got the back on, batteries back in, turned it on again, still worked. But then I looked down. One little screw was sitting on the carpet. I had no idea where it went. I'm guessing probably the circuit board, but I had no idea. I shook the boombox, didn't hear any rattle, called it good, and put the screw on my dresser like a trophy. And then I cranked the volume. But then I realized, I got to put my dad's tools back, or I'm going to get in trouble. So I ran around putting all the tools back, extra rubber bands, tweezers, pliers, everything went back in the toolbox. Even the rubber bands from my dad's desk drawer. My dad never knew. Or so I thought. Years later, we were sitting at the dinner table, just having dinner out and talking, and I brought it up. I was like, hey, you remember that old boombox I had? I think that was the first thing I ever fixed. My mom and dad just both laughed. And I was like, what's so funny? My dad goes, oh, we remember. We watched the whole thing. As it turns out, my mom did see me grab the screwdrivers. She followed me back to my room, saw me start taking apart the boombox, and she was about to light me up, but my dad stopped her. He said, something's wrong. The music stopped, and it never stops. And he was right. Thinking back, the music never stopped. I didn't have AirPods because they didn't exist. My headphones were those cheesy, connected by wire over your head with like the little orange foam. Yeah, you see those in 80s movies or maybe Stranger Things. Yeah, that was it. That was what we had. So there was a lot of music played over speakers, and I liked it loud because, well, that's the way we played our rock. Well, he knew that it never stopped, so he was right. He was right. He picked up that something's wrong. The music stopped, and it never stops. So he said to her, let him try to fix it. My mom wasn't convinced because they'd saved up a lot of money for that boombox for Christmas. It was only a couple months after Christmas because school hadn't let out yet, but I know it wasn't cheap. But my dad calmed her down by telling her a story about when he was about that same age, he built a transistor radio from a Radio Shack kit. And he didn't follow the instructions in order. He just kind of skimmed through them, experimented, saw the parts, tried things, broke things, fixed them again, and eventually it worked. He told her if we punish him now for being curious and trying, he might not try again. What my mom saw was a kid about to break something expensive. What my dad saw was a tinkerer in the making. That moment shaped me. I didn't know it then. They may not have known it then, but it did. That freedom to explore, to take something apart and figure it out without knowing what every part was called or how it all worked. That's where my engineering mindset came from. It wasn't a formal education. It wasn't a structured program. It was permission, quiet permission, permission to try, permission to fail, and a quiet kind of faith that I could just figure it out. And that's what I implore a lot of leaders to do is give your teams, your technical teams, be they engineers or technicians, permission to fail, permission to try, as long as when they fail, they learn and keep trying. That's how they get better. That's how they will innovate. That's how they will fix complex problems that they've never seen before. But that's what planted the seed for me. That's what taught me to look inside, not just machines, but systems, and ask questions. Why isn't this working? What's that thing connected to? What's the purpose of this little widget over here? That curiosity didn't stay in the 80s. It's followed me through every role I've ever had. From fixing secure networks and installing secure networks at DISA to co-designing safety systems and cybersecurity systems at Disney, all the way through the wireless technologies that we installed at Epic Universe. And it's what's inspired me to help new engineers grow into tomorrow's leaders. And it all started with a boombox and a rubber band. It's funny how often I've looked back at that moment, kneeling on the carpet, boombox cracked open, tools everywhere. At the time, I didn't know I was learning anything, but I was. I was learning to troubleshoot. I was learning to pay attention to the way systems were built. I was learning that failure was a part of the process. And what started as a childhood curiosity eventually matured into something more structured. In engineering, we call it root cause analysis. In cybersecurity, it's threat modeling and attack surfaces. In networking, it's architecture and optimization. But the mindset is the same. Curiosity becomes method. Trial and error becomes design. Tinkering becomes innovation when it's nurtured. That's the through line. Whether it's fixing a tape deck or architecting secure infrastructure, innovation is built on the same foundation. The freedom to explore and the confidence to try again when it doesn't work. From control rooms guiding spacecraft to carpeted bedrooms with screwdrivers and cassette decks, sparks of innovation aren't always loud. They come when someone gives you space. They grow when someone believes in your ability, before you've earned the confidence to believe in it yourself. My grandfather's simulator, my boombox, Grace Hopper's nanosecond. These were all different kinds of labs, spaces where someone was allowed to try, fail, learn, and try again. In the next episode, we're going to talk about what happens after the spark, when someone is trusted, when someone is challenged, when mentorship turns quiet potential into powerful leadership. I'll share stories from my time in the Navy, how early responsibility shaped me, how someone I mentored found her voice and grew into a leader who went farther than anyone imagined. The future doesn't just need fire, it needs fuel. And that fuel is trust, guidance, and the courage to believe in someone before the world does. I hope you'll join me next time on The Digital Keep. Thanks for listening to The Digital Keep. Drop a comment below. Hit like and subscribe. It helps people find the show. Until next time, watch the walls, mind the gate, and build your legacy.